Hello, my name is Houston, and this is Media Mood Board. Today, my favorite books of 2023. Yes, my name's Houston, and this is Media Mood Board, a show about hyper-specific entertainment lists. Each week in December, I'm counting down my favorites from a bunch of different mediums: books, games, comics, movies. Today, I'm counting down my favorite books of 2023. A little housekeeping beforehand. This was originally going to be my favorite books, and I was going to also list my favorite comics. But I was looking at the YouTube analytics this week, and it looks like most of my videos you guys watch between like 4 and 8 minutes. So I'm just going to break those up. Comics are going to go later next week, so I can make videos for you guys that's at a more digestible length, something that fits y'all's needs better. But back to books. I did read a lot of amazing ones this year. Even though most of the things I read were published before 2023, there's some really incredible ones I read this year that did. Next year, I want to set a goal for myself to read more contemporary literature, so I have more to choose from. I hope that you find something that you like in here, and please leave your favorites in the comments. I'm sure that I missed them, and I'm excited to see if what resonated with people. Let's get to the list. Number 5, Reproduction by Louisa Hall. Part visceral descriptions of various experiences of childbirth, part Mary Shelley biography, Reproduction is the pregnancy journey of an author writing a biography of the person who wrote Frankenstein. So this book is really interesting because formally it reads like nonfiction. It reads like a long form article, but is actually fiction. For instance, I would compare this to like H is for Hawk, Helen Macdonald's memoir about learning to raise a hawk to deal with the death of her father, while also being a biography about the person who wrote The Sword and the Stone, while also being nature writing. It's got that same kind of vibe, except that it is a fiction. So this thread of the main character's pregnancy journey is able to be manipulated or heightened, or the people she runs into are built to suit the needs that the author is trying to explore, while still having these offshoots of nonfiction like the things about Mary Shelley. I read this interview, which was really insightful, with Louisa Hall, the author, about her main goal when writing this book. This is from the interview. In her essay On Being Ill, Virginia Woolf complains that English literature has failed to find the words for the experience of a headache. English, she writes, which can express the thoughts of Hamlet and the tragedy of Lear, has no words for the shiver and the headache. I thought of her essay often when I was pregnant for the first time and after labor, when I found myself reflecting that the problem she describes still persists, and no more so perhaps than when it comes to childbirth. And I think she really succeeded at her goal. All of her descriptions feel very tactile and effective, and realized I really felt what this main character was going through. And I also enjoyed learning about Mary Shelley, who I didn't really know anything about. I had no idea that she had a difficult pregnancy journey, even while she was writing Frankenstein, and kind of her relationship with her children. This is actually a great companion piece to one of my favorite movies of the year, Our Body, which is a series of vignettes in a Parisian hospital in the gynecological ward. 2023 has definitely been a year for me where I've been presented with the opportunity to learn more about this huge part of human existence, which, at least in my life, has always been hushed within public discourse. Like, I know a lot of people who have gone through pregnancy or struggle with it, and no one has the same story, but I don't really hear it talked about very much. It seems behind closed doors, and maybe that's my own experience rather than everyone's, but I'm grateful that things like this exist so that I can feel more connected to people around me. A little bit of whiplash maybe here, but number 4 is Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. In a land of magic and dragons, Violet Sorengale wants to become a war journalist and historian, but is forced by her war general mother to join the branch of the army that rides dragons. Fourth Wing is the perfect podcast book. I like to listen to something on my headphones when I'm like doing chores or work that doesn't require my full brain power, or like when I'm on the treadmill or something like that. And it can be really difficult to find books that are engaging and fun, but also don't take up all of your brain bandwidth. And Fourth Wing is a prime example of that. It's something that is engaging enough that it makes me look around for more chores to do, or say, hey, I should go down to the gym for a little bit so I can listen to this book more. Yarros is an extremely utilitarian storyteller Both Fourth Wing and its sequel Iron Flame were released in 2023, and both are over 500 pages. The reason she's able to pump these out so fast, in my opinion, is in part due to her writing style. She leaves none of the plot or story to speculation. For instance, this is a made-up sentence, but this is the kind of book where you'd see a sentence that says something like, Xaden clicked his jaw in a way that said, I'm frustrated with what you just said. But if you were to say a few more sentences, you might convince me. It's more like reading a script with notes for the actors than it is like a book. Also, side note, the main character has a love interest named Xaden, and there is a lot of jaw clicking. There is a lot of jaw work in her books, a lot of clicking. I think she must be like a really big fan of Tom Cruise or something. The plot is simple. You can zone out for large portions and pop back in, and you haven't missed anything that crucial. There are a bunch of proper nouns like all fantasy, but if you don't retain them, it really doesn't matter that much. The plot reminds me so much of shonen anime that I used to read all the time. She gets sent into this training program for dragon riders where she meets all these colorful characters who all have specific personalities and like fighting techniques and physical abilities that are associated with their personalities. They do all these physical tests. Then they are chosen by dragons and gain magic abilities that correspond with their fighting style or with their personality, and then have to go on quests or missions and use all those powers together. And part of the fun is like, ooh, what's their power going to be? Or how is that going to manifest? How are they going to use that in battle? Like, oh, this guy's kind of shady. I bet you he's got this bad guy power or whatever. You know, you see these, oh, what would happen if they fought each other? Like, what would that like strategically look like? And you think to yourself like, oh, like what would mine be? Or, you know, it's fun. It's not the most sophisticated writing, but that's not the point. It really scratches such a specific itch. It reminds me so much of reading like shonen manga or like when I was a kid reading Harry Potter. If that sounds interesting, check out Fourth Wing. Number 3, The Vaster Wilds by Lauren Groff. A servant girl in colonial America commits a crime and flees to the wilderness, where she's hunted by both man and beast. This is like early Americana folk horror vibes. Like it's a book about viscera and dark piss. A lot of the blurbs talk about how philosophical it is, but nobody talks about how you meet this cast of like real weirdo characters. One of the people she meets in the woods is this Spaniard who's lived off the land in the woods for 20 years, whose beard has melded into their chest and back hair, and who can talk to crows. This book just has incredible atmosphere and characters. So many people you meet that I'm like, oh, I want to spend a whole book with this person. That's honestly my biggest criticism of this, is that we don't get enough time with some of these weirdos that she creates. I'd love to just like, oh, let's follow them for longer. It's an incredibly fun and thoughtful book that doesn't overstay its welcome. And it does feel like a fairy tale at times, which I think its alternate cover kind of tells that story really well. And it really got my imagination going, which is so powerful. The story is at its best when it's telling vignettes of colonial life or focusing on these weird, almost magical realist characters that she meets. In the ending stretch, I won't spoil, but I'll just say it is so good. And it's just an amazing execution of something that could easily be tropey. I'm definitely going to be looking out for more books that have this kind of vibe in 2024. Also the cover. I mean, like the cover's incredible. I know, it's so good. Number 2, Monstrilio by Gerardo, Sámano, Córdova. When her infant son dies, Magos cuts out his lung, which soon grows into a monster, which her family then tries to raise. This book is so good. It was my number 1 for the majority of the year. And honestly, it still would be the book that I recommend to the most people. Immediately, this book starts with a huge bang and grips you and says, okay, I need to know what's happening. It takes this concept of like a chunk of human flesh becoming a monster and growing up and kind of this coming of age story, and what it would be like to try and like raise a monster in secret and then also try and then like have it become a part of society. It just explores all these different avenues, all these different locations and times in such a fun way. All the psyches of everyone that's involved in the family. It's just so fully realized. And like most good horror, this really does come from a place of humanity. It comes from this fear of loss. It's like, I know there's so many like A24, like the real horror is grief, but this is, it explores it in an interesting way here, and that it's not like Hereditary where it's like taking a bath in grief. It's like, okay, when you're grieving, what if what you wanted came true, and then you had to like continually put off dealing with your problem, like what people do to gain control over grief. The book is told in multiple chunks, and each chunk has a different narrator for the story. Part of the fun is when this happens, so I'm not going to say how many there are or who you pop to, but I'll say that, because it's irrelevant, that they are all characters that you've already met in the story. And Córdova really uses this to like build up layers of feeling through the story. Like if you start with one character and they do something that's morally ambiguous, because you're following them, you are judging them, but you feel a little bit more on their side because you're following them through it. And then if you hop to another character and they're reflecting on that, or that scene affected them, it's hard to fully sympathize with the character that you're on because you've been through the shoes of the first character, but you kind of get where they're coming from. You start defending different characters, and it builds layer on layer on layer on layer. And by the end, there's like so many different things going on, and you're seeing the world from every character's perspective as you travel through the story. It's really, really interesting. Just like fun storytelling. It builds out the world even more than it's like it's world building in several different directions at once. It does an amazing job of making you think about the themes outside of the book. It does an amazing job formally in its storytelling style. And it does all this while being extremely entertaining and fun. So good. And finally, my favorite book of 2023, Study for Obedience, by Sarah Bernstein. When a woman from a large family moves in with her brother to help him out after a divorce, a series of strange events begin to plague the small town where he lives, and the villagers begin to suspect her arrival is behind it. It's just small town superstition. Or is it? Looking at my top 5, like as I was collecting these, I was like, oh, these are all kind of like horror adjacent, which is funny. That's not like a genre I necessarily like associate myself with, but maybe I should look into that more. Anyways, number 1, this is some really effective, unreliable narrator stuff. It's all told from this one character's perspective, and from the beginning, you're suspect. But you kind of feel like you have an idea of what you can trust and what you can't trust from what she's saying. But as the book goes on, it starts poking holes in even the things that you're like, that was true, or I can trust her on this. Like these really weird things start happening, and the villagers are kind of like, oh, this is because she's like a witch or something. And you're like, that's stupid. But as the book kind of goes on, you're like, wait, well, is she though? Part of the fun is like coming to that conclusion yourself as this evidence is laid before you. I think this is an extremely rereadable book. As far as like formally, it doesn't read like a contemporary book. There's like the long, dense sentences. They're still really interesting, but this is a short book. And I don't claim myself to be a fast reader, but this took me way longer to finish than I expected. That's not a slam. That's just something it's a stylistic decision. It's night and day between something like Monstrilio, which feels contemporary and accessible, easy to read, whereas this feels more like literature, if that makes sense. And I'm not saying literature to mean like this is better writing. It's just a style. It's purposefully kind of hard to read, in my opinion. Like I said, Monstrilio was my number 1 for a long time. But there's one thing about this book that did push it to the top of my list. This is probably sad if you've like read the book and know who the main character is, but I've never seen myself in a main character in any form of media in the same way that I've seen myself in the main character of this book. which is hard because, guys, she's not great. Anyways, I was constantly shocked by her relatability throughout the story. And I've never experienced that in any form of media. Of course, like themes are like, oh, I've had that feeling before, but I've never identified with a character like I have the main character of this book. And that was a really special experience. That, coupled with the mystery elements that come about because of the unreliable narration, these kind of folk horror-y potential, elements, the world that the author builds beyond the page, and the fact that it's like a short book. I like that a lot too. All of these together, I could not give it my number one. Well, you made it. Those were my favorite books of 2023. Did you like or hate any of the books that I mentioned? Is there anything that I missed? I'll be back midway through next week for my countdown of my favorite comics of 2023. If that's your thing, I'll see you then. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Houston. This is Media Mood Board. Bye.